You said, what's one question about startups that no one can seem to answer? And I found this one. This is just going to, it's the warm up, Will. Like, this is the first scrum that we're going to do. And we had Marc Russell, really appreciated his response there. He said, who's the silent competitor kicking our butt? Will tomorrow's tech AI make us obsolete? What's the next best disruption we're blind to? Is our best hire going to flame out or leave? Are we innovating or just iterating? Can we out-execute the competition? I'm going to let you warm up for a second, Will, by asking you this question first. What is it about founders where sometimes I find, I don't know about you, but they're not asking the right question? Like, founders can definitely learn to ask better questions. What do you think about that?
I think part of it, Ed, is that most folks are going through this for the first time. You know, this is freshman year of high school. We were still getting stuffed in lockers. You don't really know how this whole thing plays out. And it's terrifying because you're putting your whole life, your savings, everything into this. And truth be told, you have no goddamn idea what you're doing. And why would you? Nobody's ever done this. This is one of the few professions, being a founder, being an entrepreneur, that there's almost no schooling for, right? Which is part of where we try to help with Startups.com. There's so few people have any resource of a person they can go to that says, yeah, this is how you do it all the time. My father-in-law is an attorney. So if I were to become an attorney, I could just go to him and be like, dude, like, how's this case law work, right? And there'd be a million attorneys to go to, and everybody understands exactly how it works. And if I needed to become an attorney, I could get to a law school and become an attorney. It's so perfectly set up. Right? Not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's all figured out. This is a business where nothing is figured out. And the direction you tend to get, because everybody's kind of making it up, is hilariously bad most of the time. It's hilariously bad. I remember when I was first starting, this was a billion years ago, the direction I would get from people about how to start a company, this is like in the early 90s, was in retrospect, well-meaning, but so bad. And most of the direction I got back then was you should probably stay in college.
Funny, I heard that a few times as well.
What's the advice I got? You should probably not do this. But like, you know, we have over 1 million founders in the platform, and founders will come to us and they'll say, hey, I heard this from this, you know, executive or this mentor. And Ed, you and I deal with it all the time. We're like, dude, that's the worst advice you could possibly get, right? Like, it's so easy to get misdirected and spun around in this business, you know?
It's something that I've talked about on my other videos. We talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you learn a little bit and suddenly you think you're an expert. And we see this all the time. It's like armchair quarterbacks or people on TikTok. They think, wow, you know, I made a few TikTok videos. You know, I heard some people talk about it on social media, watch a YouTube video. And now I know how to solve conflict in the Middle East. This is what you have to do, you know, on the Gaza Strip. And I think that what's important, that I'd love all the founders, and I see you in the audience, founders, is that remember, the next founder of the unicorn, like the next Mark Zuckerberg, is not going to look like Mark Zuckerberg. Therefore, Mark Zuckerberg asked certain questions back then. He's going to be asking different questions for the next Mark Zuckerberg. So that's the important thing is the questions are going to evolve, and that's where we have to be adaptive in the evolution of the discussions that we have. And so I'm going to adapt these questions just a little bit. Will, let's discuss, because I think this is going to be a great exercise. But let's talk about competition. All right. You know, founders, they think they know the competition, but often they don't really know the competition, or they're not asking the right question about competition, and therefore they can miss these, what they call silent competitors. What do you think about competition? How do we approach competition?
Okay, it's a couple things. I think that people way overestimate competition. And let me give you some examples, okay? Whenever I hear an investor say, oh, well, isn't that big company going to do that? Or couldn't they do that? I was like, do you know how rarely a big company does anything? Right? That's the whole point, right? It's like, well, Google will just do that. And this is Google we're talking about, right? An incredibly innovative company. And I'm like, yeah, in theory, yes, they could do that, right? But by the time they get around to it, and by the way, just because they're doing it doesn't mean they're doing it well. It cracks me up. But when I look at competition, particularly big competition, okay, I always use the reference that they are the Death Star and I'm the X-Wing fighter. Yes. If they finally get around to Alderaan, I'm screwed. But until then, I'm going to fire a couple torpedoes and blow this thing up, right? Because I'm faster, I'm more nimble. When people look at their competition, they say, oh, my competitor got funded. And, oh, we're screwed because they have money. You're making a giant assumption that they're going to be any good with it, right? Ed, how many funded companies do we talk to that if we talk to the companies, they're like, we have no idea what we're doing?
All the time. And I think a lot of founders underestimate that competition is, one, a good thing. If there are multiple competitors, that means the market is big enough. So for every Uber, there's a Lyft, and there's different ways that you can approach it. But also, I think one of the things we're missing when it comes to silent competitors, that founders get wrapped up in thinking it's another startup company. One major competitor are founders or customers doing nothing or finding their own way and doing some alternative to solve the problem. And I think a lot of founders overlook that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that for a lot of problems or market opportunities, you got a bunch of different companies that are trying a bunch of different ways to solve it. And the truth is, none of them knows which one's going to win, right? And it always cracks me up because, like, I love old internet lore. Way back in the day, when Google was trying to figure out how to monetize, there was this company that no one's heard of anymore because they've died in the annals of tech lore called Overture. And Overture had figured out how to do what's essentially the pay-per-click model. Right?
Yes, I remember that.
And do you remember what Google did with that model with Overture? They stole it.
Exactly.
Stole it verbatim, right? So Google didn't invent a goddamn thing, and yet it became their entire business, and they got sued for it. They got sued for it, right? For hundreds of millions of dollars and lost, and it was a day's pay for Google by the time they had lost that lawsuit, right? I bring up this story to say, when we look at the power of what other companies can do, the pace that they move at, Google stole the best idea they ever had in the paid search model, right? Their plan, the way they thought it was going to go was so far off the mark, and they ended up becoming a dominant competitor in a totally different way. I'm just saying there's a million paths to succeed. People tend to forget what their evil path was.
But let's talk about, Will, a little bit of a warning for founders, because I also find founders end up doing something generic. Let's take, at top of my mind, video editing. They say, we're going to create a new video editor. And you and everybody else is thinking, we're going to create a new video editor. You know, one major, totally saturated market right now I see, AI agents. All right?
Yeah, of course,
This is the blockchain crypto. We're going to turn everything on to blockchain back in, a few years ago. But now it's AI agents all over the place. So how should we look at competition and differentiating ourselves and just making sure that we are doing something different?
I look at it as a lot of people will look at features and they'll say, we have to have better features. We have to have different features. And yes, I think at some level, sure. Okay, that's some differentiation. But what they take for granted, Ed, and I'm curious your thoughts here, is that just because we have these features and they have those features, that those are the only variables. You're assuming that just because maybe they have what are better features, that the people that run that company are also better at running it. I've had the great misfortune to be on both sides of that, where I was the company that messed it up and I was the company that benefited because somebody else messed it up. I'll give you a quick example. In the early 90s, I had started one of the first web design companies. Okay. And at first I was an anomaly because we were building like some of the first web pages on the internet, like 93, 94. And all of a sudden, like overnight, everybody got into that business. Like everybody got into that business. And I was completely overwhelmed. And I was like, okay, well, we lost because all the big players got in it. What I didn't think about, I was like 21 at the time. What I didn't think about was, yeah, they're getting big, but the people inside those businesses, like the big agencies that were becoming huge, have no idea what they're doing. They can make big announcements, they have huge clients, but their work sucked. Like what they actually did for the clients was so awful because everybody within those 50,000 person companies didn't understand the technology at all. And here I am, this tiny little outfit running circles around these guys, right? Death Star, X-Wing fighter. And what I learned was just because someone's bigger, different feature set, whatever, doesn't mean that the company behind it, the executives behind it, have earned it, right? Like I can out-execute them, hopefully, right? I also had to go the other way.
Yep. Big companies are really tough to turn. And there are so many nooks and crannies that the big companies are not looking at. You just have to know your customer. You have to know the problem and forget about the features or forget about going head to head, but find that side door, find that weakness. And, investors like that, Will, and investors will just start to work with you on that. And especially if you can show that insight. So let's talk about, because I know this is a lot for the founders here, then the competition slide on your pitch deck. So let's really dovetail into, hey, how do we look at competition? And then just give us the overview, because I'm looking at the audience right now, and I know we're looking at your pitch deck. So walk us through how we translate your approach to competition to the pitch deck slide.
Well, one of the things we always talk about with the pitch deck competition slide specifically is that people go about it wrong. When they're presenting who their competition is, they immediately go to who the other companies are. What they miss, the essence of why you're competitive, is what your customer cares about, So in other words, if I were to say Uber, let's take it as an example, right? Back in the day, that we're better than Lyft because we have this feature and this feature in our app. Yeah, but you haven't told me why consumers care about that. Oh, they care about it because this feature tells you where your cab is. Boom, that's why you're better, because that's what customers care about, not because you have a feature. And I think when we look at our businesses, we get so hung up on what features do we have, who raised more money, things like that. We miss the part, are we really good at servicing our customers? I'll give you one more anecdote on that one, going back to the agency. The agency ended up growing a lot. We were about a $700 million agency at this point. And in all of our meetings, okay, this is about competition. In all of our meetings, all of our board meetings were always about the financial growth of the company, the financial health of the company, billings, work in progress, all these like mechanics. After like a year and a half, I remember being at the board meeting and being like, do you know we've never had a conversation about whether our product's any good? Like it's like never even came up, right? And we're literally in the creative business, right? We're creating these huge campaigns, and I was like, shouldn't that be a problem? And this is funny, Ed. My business partner at the time said it's not a problem. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we are great at selling. I thought that was interesting. He wasn't wrong, by the way. Professional services businesses, which we were, are sales businesses that happen to perform services, not a services business that happens to do sales. If you're great at sales, you're going to be a huge professional service business, even if you're okay. I would say our creative, not trying to be a jerk about it, it's 20 plus years ago, so who cares anymore, was a B minus on a good day. We weren't the most creative, but holy shit, we could sell well. And our competitors were like, what's going on with these guys? They're not even that good. Look at their work. I'm like, yeah, we sell better than you do, so we get the work.
That's true for so many startups. I hear people say, oh, the product's not as good, but they've got an entire business model. They've got other things figured out. And that's how you definitely want to differentiate. You know how you do that, everyone? You do things that don't scale. So you get hand-to-hand combat right in front, founder-led sales, learn how to do it, and then you can scale it while your competitor is thinking, oh, how do we get our entire sales team of like 50 sales reps out there? And how do we spend tens of thousands of dollars on influencer marketing campaigns? Meanwhile, you are scrapping your way to the customers by getting right in front of them. And wow, is that ever an advantage? And again, investors are going to respond to it. Tell them that story of what you've learned, how you've hacked your way to your traction. And believe me, you will be differentiated from your competitor.
Also just a willingness to do stuff people aren't willing to do.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I can't emphasize this enough. There's a guy that was all over the media this past week, a guy named Bill Clerico. He's a founder of WePay, which I think sold to Chase. And I met Bill a really long time ago. When they're first starting WePay, which is a payments company, and it was kind of like a competitor to PayPal. He and his business partners, this is somewhere out, you can Google this, at a huge PayPal conference, showed up with a giant block of ice. I'm talking like a refrigerator-sized block of ice, and it had a bunch of cash frozen inside it with a message that said, PayPal is freezing your money. And they pushed it right in front of the conference. So every conference or nobody could move it, right? Like 500 pounds, right? And I love that story because I was like, he was willing to do something no one would have the balls to do. And it made a huge difference. It got crazy headlines. It's all anybody talked about. His product at their conference, right? Seriously? Like, who would do that? And I think a lot of this is founders like, well, that would be crazy. Should I do it? Hell yeah, you should do it. Maybe not that exactly. That's insane, but you get it.